Hi there, my name is Faith Somerville. Today I'm going to be talking about a poet named Benjamin Zephaniah. Benjamin Zephaniah was born and raised in Birmingham, England. He cannot remember a time when he was not creating poetry, but this had nothing to do with school, for poetry meant very little to him. In fact, he had finished full-time education at the age of 13. His poetry was strongly influenced by the music and poetry of Jamaica and what he calls street politics. His first real public performance was in church when he was 10 years old. By the time he was 15, he developed a strong following in his hometown of Handsworth, where he gained a reputation as a young poet who was capable of speaking on local and international issues. He loved Handsworth. He called it the Jamaican capital of Europe, but although his work had become popular within the African, Caribbean, and Asian community, he thought the town was too small. He was not satisfied preaching about the sufferings of black people to other black people, so he sought a wider mainstream audience. At the age of 22, he headed south to London, where his first book, Pen Rhythm, was published by Page One Books. It was a small East London-based publishing cooperative that were keen on publishing poets who were rooted in their communities. They published Zephaniah when others failed to tune in the new poetry that was about to emerge. The book sold well going into 3 editions, but it was in performance that the dub poet would cause a revolution that injected new life into the British poetry scene and attracted the interest of many mainstream publishers, many of whom had sent refusal letters to him only 12 months earlier. In the early 80s, when punks and rastas were on the streets protesting about laws, high unemployment, homelessness, and the National Front, Zephaniah's poetry could be heard on the demonstrations, at youth gatherings, outside police stations, and on the dance floor. It was once said of him that he was Britain's most filmed, photographed, and identifiable poet. This was because of his ability to perform on stage, but most of all on television, bringing dub poetry straight into British living rooms. The mission was to take poetry everywhere. He hated the dead image that academia and the establishment had given poetry, and proclaimed that he was out to pulverize poetry by reaching people who did not read books. Those who were keen on books could now witness the book coming to life on the stage. This poetry was political, musical, radical, and relevant on live TV. In the 80s, his book publications, record release, and television appearances increased in Britain, although he was concentrated on performing outside Europe. He feels at home anywhere on the oral tradition and is still strong in lists out South Africa. Zimbabwe, India, Pakistan, and Colombia are some of his most memorable tours. In fact, life has been one long tour, but this was the only way oral tradition can live. Over a 22-day period in 1991, he performed on every continent on this planet. Periodically, the Benjamin Zephaniah Band takes to the road. The nature of modern music business means recordings reach places around the globe a lot quicker than the poet does. And this means that many people around the world are more familiar with the poet's music than his performances, plays, or books. His only official fan club developed in Malawi in Central Africa, where his only one-member hit record was in the former Yugoslavia, where the Rasta Lip was released in the Haitian label. He was the first person to record with the Wailers after the death of Bob Marley in the musical tribute to Nelson Mandela. They have now built a relationship which has led to Zephaniah working with children in South African townships and hosting the President's Two Nations concert at the Royal Albert Hall in 1996. There is Benjamin Zephaniah, the children's poet. His first book of poetry for children was called Talking Turkeys had to go into emergency reprint after just 6 weeks. No one could foresee how popular the book could be. It went to the top children's book list and stayed there for months. At first, he was not keen on publishing a book for children, believing that there was not just poetry, not children's poetry or adults' poetry, but he was soon convinced that young people did not appreciate the fact that he was not afraid to write about the real world where there were bullies, guns, racism, and war. Between a passionate vegan and he writes a lot about animals, but these animals were not all smiley, happy creatures. Some may be just waiting to slaughter or lose their habitat, and of course some may be having fun. And seemingly out of nowhere, in 1999, he wrote a groundbreaking novel for teenagers. Writers have said that his accessibility of his work has inspired them to take up young writing. Many record sleeves bear witness to the fact that he's inspired many the new generation of rappers. He now spends most of his time in China, but he continues working throughout Asia, South Africa, and America, and is passionate about politics and poetry as now he has ever been. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Goodbye.